The first time Adrian Russo looked at me, he didn't look angry. He looked afraid. I noticed it because men like him were not supposed to flinch, not even for a second, and yet beneath the chandelier light of the Grand Marquette Ballroom, with a string quartet breathing softly through the edges of the room and 100 rich strangers pretending not to stare, the most powerful man in that city went pale at the sight of the silver ring on my hand. 12 hours earlier, I had been standing in my mother's apartment with dust on my jeans and grief pressing against my ribs so hard it felt like I could barely breathe. The place still smelled like her lavender hand cream and the burnt coffee she always forgot on the stove. Sunlight had come through the kitchen window in tired little stripes, landing across unpaid bills, old mail, and the chipped ceramic bowl where she used to leave her keys. I should have been sorting legal papers. I should have been calling the storage company or answering my aunt's voicemails. Instead, I found myself kneeling beside her bedroom dresser, opening drawers that still felt too private to touch. Socks, scarves, receipts folded so many times the edges had gone soft. Then the bottom drawer caught halfway, like something behind it didn't want to be found. I tugged harder, and a loose wooden panel shifted with a dry little scrape. Behind it was a narrow compartment I had never seen before. Inside sat a white handkerchief wrapped around something small and heavy. When I unfolded the cloth, a silver ring slipped into my palm, cold as winter and far too elegant to belong among my mother's practical things. It was old, not antique store old, but important old, the kind of piece someone kept because forgetting it would cost too much. There was a crest engraved on the inside, so faint I had to tilt it toward the light to see it, and beneath the ring lay half of a torn note in my mother's handwriting. Keep this hidden. If anyone asks, that was all. The rest had been ripped away. I remember sitting back on my heels, staring at those 4 words until the apartment seemed to go quiet around me. My mother had never hidden jewelry. She had never owned anything that looked remotely like this. She was a second-grade teacher who bought shoes on clearance and reused gift bags until the handles came off. By 6 that evening, I still hadn't decided whether the ring felt like a clue or a warning, but I slid it onto my finger anyway before leaving for work. Maybe because it fit too perfectly. Maybe because wearing it made me feel like some part of her had chosen me. The gala was the kind of event where nobody looked directly at the help unless they needed more champagne. I had taken the shift because Rent did not care that I was grieving. So I moved through that glittering room in a black server's dress and sensible flats, balancing a silver tray while senators' wives and hedge fund men smiled at each other with polished teeth. Then the room shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, just enough for people to lower their voices and turn their heads. Adrian Russo had arrived. I knew his name the way everyone in New York knew it, carefully and without saying much after. He crossed the ballroom in a black suit that fit like it had been designed around him, his expression unreadable, his presence so controlled it made everyone else seem exaggerated by comparison. I was reaching to set down a glass when his gaze landed on my hand. He stopped, completely. His face changed in one sharp, impossible instant. Not rage, not curiosity, something deeper, something that made my stomach drop before he ever said a word. Then he started walking toward me, and every instinct I had told me that whatever my mother had hidden in that drawer had just found its way back to the man it had been hiding from. He stopped an arm's length away, and the air around me changed so completely that I forgot the weight of the tray in my hands. Up close, Adrian Russo looked less like a man stepping through a charity gala and more like a verdict arriving without hurry because it already knew the outcome. He was taller than I had realized from across the room. Dark hair brushed back from a face too controlled to be called handsome in any ordinary way. Everything about him was precise. The cut of his suit, the stillness in his shoulders, the way his eyes went to the ring again before they returned to mine. Steel gray, almost colorless beneath the ballroom lights, and fixed on me with a focus that made the rest of the room blur at the edges. "Where did you get that?" he asked. His voice was low, not raised, but people nearby quieted anyway. I glanced down at my hand as if I might somehow find a harmless answer written there. It was my mother's. The truth came out before caution could stop it. Something tightened in his face. Not much, just enough to tell me I had said the wrong thing. Behind him, 2 men in dark suits had appeared without seeming to move at all. Security, maybe, or something sharper than security. I did not know why that made my throat go dry. "Your mother's name," he said. Not a question, a demand shaped like one. Clara Bennett. I answered, because when a man looked at you like that, lying felt like stepping onto thin ice and praying it held. My mother was Evelyn Bennett. For one strange second, I thought he might forget how to breathe. Then his expression went flat again, smoother than before, as if whatever had broken loose inside him had been forced back down by hand. He reached toward me, and every nerve in my body lit up, but his fingers only hovered near my wrist, not touching, not yet. "Do not take that ring off," he said quietly. "What?" I almost laughed, except nothing about him invited laughter. I said, "Do not take it off. You do not get to tell me what to do." It was not bravery. It was reflex. The kind that shows up when fear has nowhere else to go. His eyes flicked to my face then, and for the first time I saw something other than control. Exhaustion, maybe, or recognition. "If anyone asks about it tonight," he said, each word measured, "you found it in a thrift store in Brooklyn 2 years ago. You have had it ever since. You do not know where it came from." I stared at him. Why would I say that? Because I am trying to keep you from becoming visible to the wrong people. The quartet kept playing. Glasses clinked. Somewhere to my left, a woman laughed too brightly at something a banker had said. The whole room went on pretending to be elegant while my pulse knocked hard enough to hurt. Visible to who? I asked. Adrian did not answer right away. He looked past me toward the far end of the ballroom, where a cluster of men stood near the terrace doors, their tuxedos immaculate, their smiles empty. One of them was already looking back at us. "People who remember that ring better than I do," he said. Before I could ask another question, one of the event managers rushed over, flustered and whispering about a champagne shortage near the East Bar. The spell broke just enough for me to step back. Adrian let me. But as I turned, he said my mother's name again, so softly I almost thought I imagined it. "Evelyn." I looked over my shoulder. He was no longer watching the room. He was watching me with the hollow, stunned expression of a man who had just seen a ghost wearing someone else's face. The rest of my shift passed in fragments. A silver tray balanced against my palm. A guest asking for sparkling water. Someone complaining that the crab cakes were cold when they were still steaming. Normal things. Small things. But none of it felt normal anymore, because every reflective surface in that ballroom kept catching the same image behind me. Adrian Russo, standing too still near the terrace, speaking quietly to men who listened with the kind of attention people only gave when consequences were expensive. I tried not to look at him. I failed often. Once, while pouring wine for a couple old enough to be my grandparents, I glanced up and found him already watching me. Not with hunger, not with curiosity, with the fixed concentration of someone trying to solve a problem that had walked into the room wearing my face and my mother's ring. I nearly overfilled the glass. "You all right, sweetheart?" the woman asked. I smiled the smile I used for tips and funerals and impossible days. Just tired. It was close enough to the truth to pass. By 10:30, my feet ached and the muscles between my shoulders felt locked in place, but the unease inside me had sharpened into something colder. Twice I caught unfamiliar men looking at my hand. Once near the East Bar, once by the marble staircase. Neither stared long, and that somehow made it worse. They noticed the ring, then looked away too quickly, as if pretending not to notice. It was part of some rule I had not been told. I started keeping my left hand curled around the tray handle. When I could, I tucked it behind my back. It did not help. Near the end of the auction, my phone buzzed in the pocket of my apron. Staff were not supposed to check messages on the floor, but the vibration kept going, sharp and insistent against my hip, so I stepped into the service hallway beside the kitchen and pulled it out. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I opened the text and felt the blood drain from my face. "Put the ring back where Evelyn hid it. You do not know what belongs to the dead." There was no name, no second message. Just those two sentences glowing on my screen beneath the fluorescent lights. I read them 3 times, hoping the words would become less real. They did not. My mother's first name sat there like a hand closing around my throat. Nobody was supposed to know I had found the ring that morning. I had not told my aunt. I had not told the landlord. I had not even told my best friend. The service door opened behind me, and I flinched so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Adrian stood there, his expression changing the instant he saw my face. "What happened?" he asked. I should have told him it was none of his business. I should have walked away. Instead, I handed him the phone because fear had turned my bones to glass, and he was the only person in that building who looked less surprised than I felt. He read the message once. A silence stretched between us, thin and dangerous. Then his jaw tightened. "You are leaving now," he said. "I am what? You are done for the night. I still have 2 hours left on my shift. Not anymore. You cannot order me around because of one creepy text. Clara." It was the first time he said my name, and hearing it in that low, controlled voice did something strange to the panic rising in my chest. It did not calm me. It focused me. "Who sent that?" I asked. That is what I am trying to prevent from becoming a longer answer. He handed my phone back, then removed his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders before I could protest. It smelled faintly of cedar and winter air, expensive and restrained, like everything else about him. "Keep your hand covered," he said, his eyes dropping once more to the ring beneath the fabric. "From this moment on, do exactly as I say, and I might still be early enough to protect you." The service hallway suddenly felt too narrow for breathing. 1 minute I had been standing there in my server dress with my phone shaking in my hand, and the next I was wrapped in Adrian Russo's jacket like I had been pulled into a world that made decisions faster than I could understand them. "I am not leaving with you," I said, even though my voice came out thinner than I wanted. He did not react to the defiance. He only opened the door leading toward the private elevator corridor and waited, the same way a storm cloud waits over water, certain the tide will answer eventually. "You can walk on your own," he said, "or I can explain to your manager that the Gala just lost its safest employee for the night." Safest? I almost laughed again, except the word caught in my throat. "You are the reason this is happening." His gaze held mine for one long second. "No, I am the reason you still have time to be angry about it." There was no room in that answer to argue without sounding foolish, and I hated him a little for that. I followed anyway. The corridor beyond the ballroom was quieter, dimmer, lined with gold sconces and thick carpet that swallowed our footsteps. 2 men fell in behind us at a respectful distance, not crowding, not speaking, but close enough to remind me that nothing about this was casual. When the elevator doors opened, Adrian stepped aside to let me enter first. The gesture should have felt polite. Instead, it felt ceremonial, like a line had been crossed, and pretending otherwise would insult both of us. The elevator ride down lasted less than a minute. It felt longer. I became absurdly aware of everything. The brush of the jacket against my wrists, the low hum of the cables, my own reflection in the mirrored wall, pale and tense, and very clearly standing beside a man the city talked about in lowered voices. Adrian did not look at me at first. He watched the numbers descend. "Did your mother ever mention my name?" he asked. The question came so suddenly that I turned toward him before I could stop myself. "No, not once." "Should she have?" His jaw shifted slightly. "That depends on what she wanted you to know." The elevator opened to the underground parking level before I could answer. A black sedan waited near the curb, engine running, polished enough to reflect the harsh white ceiling lights in clean silver lines. One of the men opened the rear door. I stopped walking. "I am not getting into a car with you until you tell me what this is." Adrian turned then, fully, and in the colder light of the garage he looked less like an elegant myth and more like a man running on memory and control. "That ring belonged to a woman who disappeared 14 years ago," he said. "A woman I was told betrayed my family, stole something she should never have touched, and vanished before anyone could ask her why." My fingers curled instinctively beneath the jacket. The ring suddenly felt heavier than silver should. "You think that woman was my mother. I know your mother used to be Evelyn Bennett," he said quietly. "I do not know who she was before that." The parking garage seemed to tilt beneath me. My mother had lived in Queens for 15 years. She taught spelling words and overwatered houseplants and cried at dog food commercials. She was not the kind of woman who had once been someone else. She could not be. "You are wrong," I said, and for the first time that night, I was not trying to convince him. I was trying to convince myself. Adrian's face did not harden. If anything, it softened by a degree so slight another person might have missed it. "I hope I am." Then he glanced toward the far end of the garage, where a dark SUV had just turned the corner too slowly to be random. He stepped closer without touching me, his voice dropping low. "Get in the car, Clara. You can hate me in 5 minutes. But if you stay standing here for 5 more seconds, I may not get the chance to explain anything at all." The decision happened before I fully admitted I was making it. One heartbeat, I was standing in the cold white light of the parking garage telling myself I should run, and the next I was sliding into the back seat of Adrian Russo's sedan with his jacket still around my shoulders and my mother's ring burning against my skin like it had been waiting years for this exact moment. The door shut behind me with a quiet, expensive sound that felt far too final. Adrian got in beside me. Across from us, separated by a glass partition, the driver pulled smoothly away from the curb before I could change my mind. I turned at once to the rear window. The dark SUV at the far end of the garage had stopped. Its headlights remained on, pointed straight toward us like a stare held too long. "Who are they?" I asked. Adrian looked back only once. "Not a question I want answered carelessly. That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting until we are no longer within sight of them." The sedan climbed the ramp and slipped out into the city, merging into midtown traffic with the calm confidence of a vehicle that had never once worried about being cut off. Outside, Manhattan glittered in sharp lines of glass and reflected headlights, all silver rain and late-night wealth. Inside the car, everything felt too quiet. The leather seats were soft enough to be obscene. The air smelled faintly of cedar and clean paper. I realized I was still clutching my phone so tightly my fingers hurt. Adrian noticed. "Of course he did. Let me see it," he said. "No, Clara. You do not get to keep using my name like that and expect me to hand over my phone." For the first time since I met him, the corner of his mouth almost moved. Not a smile, more like the memory of one. "Fine," he said. "Keep it, but turn it off." I hesitated. "Why?" "Because whoever sent that message knows enough already." That chilled me more than the garage had. I pressed the side button until the screen went black, then stared at my own reflection in it. "You said my mother had another name." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "What name?" He was silent for a beat too long. "Evelyn Hart." The name landed between us like something fragile and dangerous at once. Hart. Not Bennett. Not the woman who packed my lunch in brown paper bags and graded spelling quizzes at the kitchen table. Hart sounded sharper, more deliberate, like a person who had once known how to leave before being left. "You are wrong," I said again, but there was less certainty in it this time. "Maybe," he said, "but the ring is not." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, now draped over me, and pulled out a slim leather card case. From it, he removed an old photograph no bigger than a postcard and held it out without comment. I took it carefully. The edges were worn soft. The colors had faded into that warm brown cast old pictures get when time handles them too often. 3 people stood on a stone terrace somewhere bright and expensive. A young man I recognized as Adrian despite the softer face and lack of distance in his eyes. An older man beside him, broad-shouldered and severe. And between them, smiling into the sun as if she belonged there, was a woman wearing a white dress and a silver ring that caught the light even in the faded print. My breath stopped. She had my mother's mouth, my mother's eyes. Not exactly the face I knew, younger and less tired, but close enough that denial felt childish. "When was this taken?" I whispered. 15 years ago. She told me she grew up in Ohio. Then she lied. I looked up so fast the picture nearly slipped from my hand. "Do not talk about her like that." The words came sharp and immediate. Adrian did not flinch. "I am not insulting her," he said quietly. "I am telling you she spent a long time hiding from people who would have recognized that ring the second they saw it." He leaned back then, watching me with that same impossible restraint, as if he were giving me room to break without embarrassing either of us. Outside the window, the city had begun to thin. Taller buildings gave way to darker blocks, fewer lights, more sky. I swallowed hard and looked at the photograph again. My mother, or the woman who had once become my mother, smiled as if nothing terrible had happened yet. As if she did not know a future existed where she would cut herself out of old names and teach her daughter how to fold fitted sheets, and never once mention the man now sitting beside her. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Adrian's gaze dropped briefly to the ring hidden beneath the sleeve of his jacket. When he answered, his voice was lower than before, stripped of performance and polished edges. "Because the last time your mother wore that ring in front of the wrong people, she disappeared before I could stop what came next." His words stayed with me long after the city disappeared behind us. "The last time your mother wore that ring in front of the wrong people, she disappeared before I could stop what came next." I turned them over in my head as the sedan moved through quieter streets and finally through iron gates that opened without question. Beyond them stood a house that did not look like a house at all from a distance. It looked like the kind of place people built when they wanted walls to do more than hold up a roof. Stone, glass, warm lights burning behind tall windows. Not flashy exactly, just expensive in the way old power always was, like it had never once needed to announce itself. The car rolled to a stop beneath a covered entrance, and for a moment I did not move. Neither did Adrian. The silence between us had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers in danger. It was the silence of two people sitting beside a truth too large to enter all at once. "You can ask me one question before we go inside," he said. I looked at him, surprised. "One. The one that matters most right now." I thought of 100. Who was my mother really? What did she steal? Who texted me? Why did your face change when you saw the ring? Why does it feel like you have known my grief longer than I have? But the question that came out was smaller and somehow harder. Did you love her? Adrian's expression did not crack. It dimmed. That was the only word for it. Something old moved through his face and took the light with it. "No," he said, and my chest tightened before he continued. "But my brother did." I stared at him. He opened the door and stepped out into the night air before I could speak, and somehow that felt like part of the answer too. Inside, the house was quiet in the way museums are quiet after closing. Thick rugs, dark wood, lamps placed with intention instead of brightness. Nothing about it felt improvised. A woman in her 60s met us in the entry hall, elegant in a navy dress with silver at her temples and the kind of calm face that had seen far too much to be surprised by anything. Her eyes went first to Adrian, then to me, then to the ring I had forgotten to hide. She stopped short. "Oh," she said softly. "Just that." One syllable full of memory. Adrian took the jacket from my shoulders with surprising care and handed it to her. "Marta, Clara will stay in the East guest room tonight." The woman nodded, but her eyes did not leave my face. Of course, I should have objected. I should have said I was not staying anywhere I had not chosen. But I was tired down to the bone, and confusion was beginning to feel heavier than fear. Adrian gestured for me to follow him instead of Marta, leading me down a long hallway lined with framed black and white photographs. Old galas, church steps, men in dark suits with serious faces, families posed in gardens too formal to belong to real happiness. Then I saw her. The photograph was halfway down the wall, smaller than the others, almost hidden between two large silver-framed portraits. My mother, younger, maybe 25, hair shorter than I had ever known it. A white blouse. No smile this time. Just that same direct gaze she used whenever I tried lying about report cards in middle school. Beside her stood a man with Adrian's eyes and a warmer mouth, one arm resting on the back of her chair. He was not Adrian. He was close enough to be blood, but softer somehow. Hopeful. The silver ring gleamed on my mother's hand. I stopped walking so suddenly Adrian did too. "That is him," I said quietly. "Your brother." Adrian looked at the photograph for a long moment. "Yes." "What was his name?" "Luca." The name settled into the space between us like dust and sunlight. Luca. My mother had never said it. Never once. Not in stories. Not in sleep. Not in anger. Yet here he was, preserved behind glass like evidence from a life she had carefully erased. What happened to him? I asked. Adrian's. Reflection in the frame looked older than he had in the car. "He died the year your mother disappeared." I turned to him slowly, my heartbeat suddenly uneven. "And you think those two things are connected?" His gaze dropped to the ring, then rose back to mine. "I know they are. What I do not know yet is whether your mother ran from what happened next or spent 15 years trying to protect you from it." For a long time I could not answer him. I just stood there in that quiet hallway beneath the watchful faces of dead relatives and old secrets, staring at the photograph of my mother and Adrian's brother as if looking hard enough might force the past to behave like something reasonable. But the past never behaved. That was becoming the lesson of the night. It hid in dresser drawers and unknown numbers and silver rings that fit too perfectly. It smiled from old photographs and waited until there was nowhere left to run. "I need air," I said finally, though I was already inside a house large enough to hold its own weather. Adrian studied me for a second, then nodded once and led me down another corridor toward the back of the house. The room he opened onto was not a patio or a parlor. It was a library, floor-to-ceiling shelves and dark walnut, a fire burning low behind glass, tall windows overlooking a terrace silvered by moonlight. The city was far enough away now that the silence felt real. Not empty. Real. Adrian crossed to a sideboard and poured water into a crystal glass, then handed it to me without a word. I took it because my hands needed something to do. You said your brother loved her, I said. My voice sounded smaller in that room. Did she love him back? Adrian looked toward the windows instead of me. Yes. The answer came clean and immediate, which made it more convincing than anything else he had said that night. They were going to leave New York. I blinked at him. Leave? My brother wanted out. He had for years. Adrian's mouth tightened slightly, as if the memory itself resisted being spoken aloud. He was the only decent man born into my family at exactly the wrong time. He thought love could outrun blood. He thought if he took Evelyn and disappeared somewhere ordinary, the rest of us would let him go. I looked down at the water in my glass. The surface trembled with the same small shakes still moving through me. Somewhere ordinary. Ohio, maybe. A little house with mismatched mugs and grocery lists, and a child who thought her mother had always been a schoolteacher. Suddenly my entire life felt less like a childhood and more like a witness protection program built out of casseroles and bedtime stories. What happened? I asked. Adrian was quiet for so long I thought he might refuse. Then he reached into a drawer built into the sideboard and took out a thin file folder, worn soft at the corners. He brought it to the coffee table and opened it with the care of someone handling something that could still cut. Inside were copies of old articles, shipping records, photographs of warehouses, and names I did not recognize. Business papers on the surface. But underneath them, folded separately, was a letter in handwriting I knew so well it hit me like a second loss. My mother's. I set the glass down too quickly. Where did you get that? Adrian did not sit. It was delivered to this house 3 days after Luca died. My fingers hesitated over the page before I picked it up. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the ink was steady. Adrian, I am sorry for what this will cost you. I never meant for any of this to happen. Luca wanted to believe there was still something clean in your world. I wanted to believe him. I cannot stay. They will use me to reach what is left of him, and they will use the child if they ever learn the truth. I stopped reading. The room seemed to lose its edges. The child, I whispered. Adrian's eyes lifted to mine. No triumph. No cruelty. Just a terrible kind of patience. There was no date on the letter, he said quietly. No proof of who she meant. Only that she was pregnant when she vanished. I stared at him, every thought inside me colliding at once. You think Luca was my father. I think your mother spent 15 years hiding a child connected to this family. He took one slow step closer, not enough to crowd me, just enough to make the next words impossible to miss. And when I saw your face tonight, Clara, I did not turn pale because of the ring. I turned pale because you have my brother's eyes. For a second I forgot how to breathe. I just stared at Adrian as if the sentence itself might change if I looked at him long enough. As if there were any version of this night where the ground had not already opened beneath me. My brother's eyes. The words sounded impossible, cinematic in the worst way, the kind of revelation that belonged in old films my mother used to watch on Sunday afternoons while folding laundry. Except this was not a script. This was my mother's handwriting still trembling in my hands, a silver ring cold against my finger, and a man across from me who looked like he had been carrying the same grief for 15 years without ever setting it down. No, I said, because no was the only thing left that still sounded like mine. No, you do not get to decide that because of one letter and an old photograph. Adrian did not argue. He did not press. That somehow made it harder. He stood beside the fire with one hand resting against the back of a leather chair, his face composed, but I could see the strain in the stillness now. He had been holding himself together since the ballroom. Maybe longer. Maybe since before I was born. I am not deciding it, he said quietly. I am telling you why I recognized something the second I saw you. I shook my head and turned away from him, toward the windows, toward the dark reflection staring back at me. My face looked the same as it had that morning. Same pale skin. Same brown hair coming loose around my shoulders. Same mouth my mother gave me. But now every feature felt borrowed. Like I had spent 26 years living in a house built with hidden rooms. She would have told me. I whispered. It hurt more than I expected, saying it aloud. If any of this were true, she would have told me. Would she? Adrian's voice stayed low, careful. Or would she have done exactly what that letter says she intended to do and protected you by making sure you never had to ask these questions? I closed my eyes. The cruel thing was that I could hear my mother saying something like that. Not the words themselves. The instinct. The way she used to lock every door twice before bed. The way she never let me post our address online, even when I was in college and rolling my eyes about privacy. The way she always changed the subject when I asked about my father, giving me soft half-answers that felt complete only because I had loved her too much to push harder. He was not ready to be a parent. He left before you were born. Some people are easier to survive if you do not go looking for them. I had taken those lines as sadness. Maybe they were strategy. You said people would recognize the ring. I said, still staring at my reflection. Why? What was it? Adrian walked to the bookshelf, opened a narrow drawer hidden so neatly in the wood I had not noticed it, and pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it on the table between us and stepped back. I set my mother's letter down and opened it with hands that no longer felt steady. Inside was another silver ring, nearly identical to mine, but slightly larger, engraved with the same fading crest. A match set. My pulse stumbled. Luca's, Adrian said. They were made for them when their engagement was announced privately. I looked up. Privately. My father disapproved. The understatement in that sentence was so sharp it made my chest ache. I looked down again at the twin rings, lying inches apart after 15 years of distance, and something inside me finally gave way. Not loudly. Quietly. Like ice thinning under too much weight. My mother had kept one. Adrian's family had kept the other. Two halves of a promise neither side had buried. Why now? I asked. Why would someone wait all these years and then send that text tonight? Adrian's face changed at that, not with fear exactly, but with a focus so cold it sharpened the room. Because until tonight, you were just a woman in Manhattan with a hidden past. Now someone knows you have the ring, and if they know that, they may also know what your mother was trying to keep from them. He crossed to the table then, and, for the first time since I met him, sat down across from me instead of towering above me. The gesture should have been small. It was not. It felt like a decision. There is one more thing, he said. I almost laughed from sheer exhaustion. Of course there is. A flicker of something passed through his eyes, gone too fast to name. The note in your mother's drawer was incomplete because she removed the second half herself. We found a copy of it years ago in a safe deposit box rented under the name Evelyn Hart. Every muscle in my body went tight. You have it? Yes. Then why did you not show me before? Because once you read it, you will understand that your mother did not disappear from my family by accident. His voice dropped another degree, softer and somehow more dangerous because of it. She left carrying a secret that could change who inherits everything my father built. And there are men still alive who would do anything to make sure that secret dies before morning. The room went so still I could hear the fire shift behind the glass. A soft sound, barely anything. But after everything Adrian had said, it felt loud enough to split the night in two. I looked at him across the table, at the controlled way he held himself, at the careful distance he kept between the truth and my face, as if he knew exactly how much it would hurt when it finally arrived. Show me, I said. My voice did not shake this time. Maybe I was too tired for shaking. Maybe some part of me had already crossed the line between fear and certainty. Adrian held my gaze for one long second, then reached into the inside pocket of his shirt and withdrew a folded sheet of paper sealed inside a clear protective sleeve. He placed it on the table with the kind of care people used for sacred things and evidence. I slid it free and unfolded it. The handwriting was my mother's. There was no mistaking that. The same slant. The same deliberate loops in the letters. The same steady pressure she used when writing grocery lists or birthday cards or notes she tucked into my lunchbox when I was 8 and nervous about school pictures. But these words were not soft. They were precise. If Adrian ever sees the ring, do not lie to him unless you must. He was the only one who looked at Luca and still saw a brother before an heir. If my child is ever found, tell Adrian the truth only when there is no safer choice left. He will hate what my silence cost him, but he will understand why I ran. I stopped there because the words had blurred. Not from tears at first, from shock. My child. Not a possibility. Not a fear. Not some unfinished sentence hidden behind hope and speculation. My child. I read the line again, then again, as if repetition might make it hurt less. It did not. She knew. I whispered. She knew she might have to send me back to you. Adrian did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was so quiet I almost missed it. I do not think she ever wanted to. That was when the tears came. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just hot and sudden, sliding down before I could stop them. I hated crying in front of people. My mother used to say tears made other people think they had won something. But this did not feel like losing. It felt like standing in the center of my own life and realizing half of it had been built on a door kept locked for my protection. I pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth and looked down at the letter again. There was more. The ring is not proof by itself. The birth certificate is hidden where no one from this city would think to search. If the wrong men come first, burn this. If Adrian comes first, tell him to look beneath the floorboards under the cedar chest. My breath caught. The cedar chest. My mother's old hope chest at the foot of her bed. I had dusted it that morning. I had even set a box on top of it. I had not thought to move it. There is more at the apartment, I said, lifting my eyes to Adrian's. Something under the floor. His whole expression sharpened at once. Then we go now. He was already on his feet when a sound cut through the room. Not a scream. Not an alarm. Just 3 quick chimes from somewhere deep in the house, measured and controlled. Adrian went still. I had seen him quiet before, but this was different. This was attention turning lethal without raising its voice. A second later, the library. Door opened and Marta stepped inside, pale beneath the warm lamplight. The East Gate camera picked up 2 vehicles on the service road, she said. They turned off their headlights before the trees. Adrian did not look away from me. How long? Less than a minute. The letter trembled in my hands. Adrian crossed the room, took the page gently before my grip could crush it, and slipped it back into its sleeve. Then he looked at me with a steadiness that felt stronger than comfort and more honest than reassurance. Clara, he said, and now my name sounded nothing like a command. It sounded like a promise forced to choose speed over tenderness. Whatever your mother hid beneath those floorboards is why they are here tonight. He extended his hand. Come with me now, and before sunrise I will show you exactly who you are.